My dad has always been loving and caring for his entire life. He's looked after me, raised me, and quite frankly spoiled me since I was a little girl. I always remembered the times he comforted me when I was scared and cuddled me when I was sad. I told him over and over again, "You're the best daddy in the world." Embarrassingly, I even used to say it when I was a teenager. My brother went missing when I was young, and it seems like Dad poured all of his love into me as a way to compensate. My dad had a stroke last week. I got the call from my mom, who was short and sharp as usual, calling me to the hospital. I went and held my dad's hand whilst he looked at me, frozen in the terrified expression he'd had when the stroke hit him. Not only that, but I cried over him for what seemed like a whole day. I decided the next day to pull myself together. I told Dad I was going to go and get him some more clothes and personal effects to hopefully help his recovery. Not only that, but I swear I saw his heart rate spike on the monitor as I walked out. But maybe I'm just remembering it wrong in light of what I know now. I got to the house and made my way up to Dad's room. I gathered some shirts, some comfortable sweatpants, and opened his drawer to get some personal effects. Likewise, I was shocked to find a tightly bound set of pages, which seemed to be handwritten. The first page read, "How to Be a Good Dad, A Guide to Love and Discipline" by Andrew Bauer. Dad had written a book? About parenting? I flicked through it and stopped on a page and began to read. "Behave or a monster will come and get you." That was the line my wife Lucy always used to scare my daughter Sarah. Sarah was a sweet girl, only 8, and it worked on her every time. Playing too loudly in the garden? A monster will come and get you. Not eating all of her peas at dinner? A monster will come and get you. Not tidying her room? A monster. Yeah, you get the point. Until she started seeing an actual monster, that is. It was a boring midweek evening, and I was watching TV with a beer when Sarah came up to me and snuggled alongside me. I wrapped my arm around her and kissed the top of her head. She turned to me and nervously said, "Daddy, can I ask you something?" I smiled at her and replied, "Yes, of course, sweetie, what's up?" She paused, looking around with innocent wide eyes, and then turned her attention back to me. "Are monsters real?" I laughed, bringing the attention of Lucy from the other room. She walked in holding a glass of water and joined in the conversation. "What's so funny?" she asked, sitting down on the chair next to the sofa me and Sarah were sat on. "Sarah wants to know if monsters are real," I said, smiling. Lucy laughed too. We assured our little girl that monsters aren't real and that there was nothing to be scared of. Sarah looked at both of us and swallowed hard. She wanted to ask something else, I could tell. I snuggled her a little closer to me and gave her an encouraging squeeze on her arm. What if a monster comes and gets me like the one that took Michael?" she said, her childish voice trembling. Lucy's grip on her glass of water turned so tight her knuckles started to whiten, and I gritted my teeth hard. "We didn't talk about Michael. He was, whatever the hell you want to say, our son. He went missing about a year ago, and since then Lucy can't even bear to hear his name." Sarah had long learned better than to talk about him lest she upset her mother, and I just tried not to think about it altogether. The police had searched for weeks. We'd all been out searching the neighborhood, and found the square root of nothing. No clues, no leads, just an emptiness in a room where Michael should have been. The police suspected a runaway. After all, Michael was 16, and that brought along the usual teen attitude and drama that you'd expect, but running away wasn't Michael. He was too proud and sure of himself to run away from anything. A kidnapping was another possibility. But again, whoever did that would have a fight on their hands. It was a mystery unsolved, an endless question mark in all of our lives, and something which just didn't get talked about. "A monster didn't take Michael, Because monsters don't exist, shouted Lucy, her grip now perilously close to shattering the glass of water she held. Sarah began to cry and clutched me tightly. I hugged her and reassured her that Mama was sorry, that she didn't mean to shout, and gave Lucy a warning look. She sighed and got up, muttering, "I'm going to bed." I suggested that Sarah and I do the same, and did the usual routine of tucking her in and reading her a story before joining Lucy in bed. The next day, at breakfast, Sarah looked nervous. I was reading a book and sipping coffee when she suddenly blurted out, "There was a monster at the window last night." Lucy and I exchanged glances before reassuring Sarah yet again that monsters weren't real. She didn't let the bland reassurances of the previous night slide as easily this time, however, and continued on. "No, I promise, it was there. It was saying my name," she wailed, beginning to cry. I put down my book and walked over to her. "Sarah, honey, monsters aren't real. You were probably just dreaming," I said calmly, putting my hand on her shoulder and giving her a little squeeze. "Now come on, Daddy will take you to school." We drove to school in silence, Sarah still trying to suppress sniffles. She didn't even say goodbye as she got out of the car. When I arrived back at the house, Lucy was waiting for me. "What are we going to do about this?" she snapped frantically, looking at me with intense eyes. I sighed. I knew what she meant. Sarah couldn't believe in monsters, she was way too old, and besides, she had a nervous disposition as it was since her older brother had vanished. I needed to ensure she didn't bring this up again. I walked across the garden slowly. I approached the shed and unlocked the door. The shed was a big wooden structure made out of thick planks of wood, and had come with the house. I'd modified it to ensure it locked properly and didn't leak, but there was very little that needed doing to it. The previous occupants had used it as some sort of band practice room, so it was soundproofed and large. I opened the door and stepped inside, closing it behind me. There, shackled to a post at the far end of the shed, was Sarah's monster. It was dressed in tattered rags, but outside of that had no dignity. Shit streaks ran down its legs, and its skinny frame held up a big, battered head. There was no nose, just two large punctures in the center of the face, blood and mucus crusted around the holes. One eye was a blank red pit where an eye should be, and the other eye was bloodshot and hateful. The lips had been cut off, so a set of yellow, crooked teeth jutted out of the center of the face. It was undeniably a monster, and it eyed me warily as I strode across the shed. Clipping the shackle back into place, it had come loose and the creature had clearly been trying to pretend it was still binding it. I leaned down close to the creature and paused, taking in the smell of shit, piss and sweat from it. I went very close to its ear and whispered angrily, "If you ever bother your sister again, I'll come back in here and scoop your other eye out." I stood and walked out, locking the shed behind me as I went. I strode back across the garden and into my house, where Lucy was waiting for me. She gave me a look that was a question, asking if it was sorted. "Sarah won't be getting any more late-night visits from her monster, don't worry," I said, smiling at my wife. "You're the best dad in the world," she whispered, kissing me gently on the lips. I looked up, shocked. I couldn't believe what I was reading. Dad had kept Michael in the shed? Since I was 7 years old? My hand shook as I continued to turn pages, unable to believe what I was reading. Mom and Dad were monsters. They were evil. I stood up quickly, my mind racing. I had to get out to the shed, I had to see Michael. If he was still alive, I had to. The door downstairs opened. "Sarah? Are you here?" shouted my mom. I stayed silent, moving very slowly as to not creak the floorboards, my skin on end with terror. "You didn't read your dad's book, did you?" "Sarah?" shouted my mom. I could hear that she was standing in the hallway. She must have been stood stock still, as I couldn't hear any other movement. "Your father has a book in his bedside. The nurse told me you'd come home to collect some things. You haven't read it, have you?" I paused, wondering about the oddness of this situation. The first thing that scared me was how my mum had jumped to that assumption straight away. It was almost like she knew. Impossible, I told myself. The second thing that scared me was how there was no fear, no anxiety in her voice. She wasn't concerned about me finding out, she just wanted to know whether I knew or not. "Why?" "So she can do to you what she did to Michael," said a voice in the back of my head. I shook with fear, still in my parents' bedroom. I was still making my mind up as to what to do, when a shout from downstairs interrupted my thoughts. "Sarah?" shouted Mum. Mind made up, I sneaked across the room into my parents' ensuite as quietly as I could, and pressed the flush button on the toilet. I walked purposefully across the room, trying to be heard, and quickly placed the book back in the drawer and closed it. I heard footsteps on the stairs and pulled out the drawer under the bed, which is where I'd previously seen my dad putting his underwear. I made a show of taking some out as my mum marched into the room, purposefully and angrily. "Oh, hi, Mum," I said, trying to be as nonchalant as possible. She eyed me suspiciously. We'd never had the best relationship in the world, and I didn't usually greet her so cheerfully. I cursed myself internally as I pressed on. "Were you shouting me?" "I was on the loo." "Yes, I was. I wanted to see if you'd been snooping in things you shouldn't have been," she said tersely, looking past me to the bedside drawer where I'd found the book. I adopted my best innocent expression as I looked at her. "No, Mom, I've just been packing some things for Daddy," I said, indicating the duffel bag on the floor behind me. She winced. I knew it made her uncomfortable when I called him Daddy, and I'd done it deliberately. It was taking every shred of effort to hold myself together, to stay strong and put up a front, but I knew I had to. I didn't know what Mom and Dad were capable of and didn't particularly want to find out. The book indicated they'd horribly tortured Michael, and I knew that if they were willing to do that, to brave the investigation of a disappearance, then there wasn't much they weren't willing to do. I looked at Mum again and said, "Shall I make us some coffee?" She looked around the room, as if searching for anything else that might be out of place, and then looked back at me. Her expression softened slightly and she said, "That'd be great, thanks." I made my way downstairs, leaving her in the bedroom. I clicked the kettle on and went through the motions of starting to make a coffee, when an idea struck me. I pulled out my phone and started texting my best friend, Tori. Tori was reliable, loyal, and could be relied upon to help without question. I trusted her with my life, and with what I'd found out about my parents, it seemed that might become a literal phrase rather than a figurative one. "Tors, I need your help ASAP. Emergency." Tori came back straight away, as I knew she would as soon as she saw the word emergency. "What do you need, babe?" "I need you to call my parents' house and ask for Lucy Bauer. Say Andrews started talking, asking for her. Say you're a nurse from the Royal Hospital Stroke Ward. Sending you the contact now." Tori had never met my parents. We were friends through work, and up until this moment I'd tried to keep my family life reasonably private. "Babe, WTH," came the text back. "Please. Can't tell you how important this is." I looked at Tori's speech bubble write, and then stop. Start writing again, and then stop. 10 seconds later, the house phone began to ring. It rang 3 times before I heard my mum's voice from upstairs. I could hear the dull murmur of a conversation, then I heard brisk footsteps coming down the stairs. My mum walked purposefully into the kitchen. "Sarah, I need to go to the hospital. Your father started talking," she said, pulling her car keys out of her coat pocket. "Oh my God, that's amazing!" I gushed, hoping my acting was good enough to be believable. "Yep, well, just stay here for now, and I'll call when I know more," said Mum as she bustled out. I listened very carefully for the sound of the car starting and pulling out of the long driveway, and then sprang into action. Firing off a quick "You're the best ex-Tory," I unlocked the patio doors and ran outside to the shed. There was a big padlock on it, but I knew how to deal with that. I took out one of my hairpins and inserted it into the lock. This was a trick an ex-boyfriend had taught me. My taste in men isn't great, as you can tell from my misjudgment of my father, but it was having a hugely practical use here. The padlock clicked and fell open. I hurriedly pulled open the shed. The smell hit me first. Feces, urine, sweat, and bile. I closed my mouth to avoid getting the taste in the back of my throat. I then saw what was chained to the back of the shed. A skeletal, ravaged husk of a human being lay shivering on the floor. Michael was still alive barely. Sinewy arms and brittle-looking legs, he was completely hairless and completely bereft. His ruined eyeball, which had been written about in Dad's book, had clearly become infected at some point and was a large open, weeping sore. His nose holes were crusted with mucus and filth, and his exposed teeth were cracked, yellow and inconsistent, black gaps denoting where some had disappeared over the years. He looked at me, his one remaining eye widening as I approached. "Sarah?" he hissed out, his removed lips making coherent speech impossible. I burst into tears. "Mikey, what have they done to you?" I wailed, as I fumbled trying to pull at his chains. I realized there'd be a key somewhere, and I needed to find it. Not only that, but I could start by getting the book, finding the key, and then getting Mikey and me out of here and straight to the nearest police station. I whispered to my brother, who had tears leaking out of his eye, that I was going to be right back, and burst back into the house, taking the stairs 2 at a time up to my parents' bedroom. It was then I stopped dead still, in shock, as Tara gripped me firmly by the scruff of the neck. I saw what I'd failed to see the first time I came into the bedroom. A little security camera, set up in the corner of the room, pointing directly at the bed. I pulled open the bedside drawer and found that the book had gone. My phone began to ring. I pulled it out. It was Mum. I answered. "Smile for the camera, Sarah," she said poisonously. "You won't get away with this, you evil bitch." I spat back, all pretenses dropped and my fight instinct kicking in. "I already have you," she laughed, her emotionless chuckle sending shivers up my spine. "I'll be back home very soon, and as I'm sure you won't leave without dear Michael, good luck trying to free him before I get back. I'll call the police. I'll have killed you both before they get anywhere near. You think me and your father weren't prepared for this? The only reason you didn't end up like Michael was because of him. You should be thankful to him." "Screw you." "Come and say that to my face then, princess." The line cut off. I heard a sharp screech as a car pulled up outside. I looked through the window as Mum stepped out, holding a knife. Check out these other stories. Thank you for watching. Take care.